In 1984, Atari was split up and sold for parts, reducing the once great company in the 1970s. So, how did an industry leader fall in under 10 years? Let's get into it. So do you hear that sound? That is the sound of Pong, released in 1972. It was a video game that sparked the console generation in the 1970s. It doesn't look like much now, and as a matter of fact, before I did this episode, I went and polled our creative team and asked them, if I were to ask you to go get me an Atari, what would you bring me? Only 1 out of 5 of our creatives could tell me what it was. Can you believe that, Johnny? 1 out of 5.
I can believe that. It's because they're too damn young.
I agree. I was just shocked. I was expecting, and of course it was Alex.
Yeah.
Alex has all the, the same trends and things that I'm aware of. It feels like she's aware of. So anytime I need a cultural reference from 40 years ago, I feel like she's the person to ask.
Yeah. And I don't think you could throw out a simplified game like that nowadays and grab someone's attention. Right.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was thinking was you look at like today of, your Call of Duty, Madden, Zelda, Zelda just released their new game on the Switch, and it looks amazing, with a lot of people, especially older people that I play video games with, or I'll play video games in front of, they'll be like, wow, it looks just like it does on TV. Like if I'm playing football or, like NBA 2K or something like that.
I think I might have told you this story before, but I was at a furniture store one time, sitting down, waiting on Karen to shop for some other stuff. And I sat and I watched an NBA game, and I'm sitting there right at the chair, and some kid sits down next to me. Right. And it ended up being, it was a video game I was watching. I thought it was a damn NBA game.
So yeah,
it was so real looking.
So case in point.
Yeah. I felt like an idiot afterwards, but yeah.
It looks real. I remember when I was a kid, I had like an original Xbox, and my grandpa wanted me just to put it on like computer versus computer mode just so we can watch football. And he didn't want me to play. He just wanted the computers to play so he could watch the game. And I was like, well, this seems counterproductive, at least for me as like a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
But Atari is the main focus of the show today. And what I thought would be good is to explore, between 1972 and, 1984, where the company finally, was sold for parts and ended up getting purchased by another company, 10 years is a relatively short time to peak. In 1977, they posted $100 million in revenue, to fall so quickly. So I thought it'd be a really good case study to talk about what were the reasons that Atari fell, why did it fall so quickly, and from a small business perspective, what are some things that you can do to make sure that you are prepared in your company to not suffer the same fate as Atari. So Atari started out as a console gaming system. And when I say console, I mean like a video arcade console, not a console that you'd have at home. So you would go to an arcade and you would play Pong or, a ton of other games that they had produced. And towards the end of the 70s, they released their first console that you could take home and you could play Pong with your friends. Now, I agree with what Johnny said when we opened the show. Like, there's no one today that's going to produce another Pong and find similar success because it was just so simple. You have, 2 paddles and you have a ball that's floating in between. We'll put it up on the screen here if you're watching on YouTube. And you can see how elementary the game is by today's standards. But in the late 70s, from what I gather, I wasn't around then, but from what I understand from people like my dad had the original Atari console, it was the thing. It was the thing to do after school. You were going to play Pong, you're going to have a little tournament, you're going to, maybe bet some money on it, who knows, but it was revolutionary for that period.
I did all of those things, Rob.
Yeah.
On a black and white TV in my bedroom. Right. So
I love it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. My friends would come over, black and white TV in my bedroom. We play some Pong.
Absolutely.
And then maybe watch some Hogan's Heroes or something like that afterwards.
Hey guys, stick around. MASH is on at 8. I love it. But that's the neat thing about these trends in technology is that looking back, you're like, wow, that's really obscure by today's standards, but that was the innovation. It's the same thing when you look at a standard console television from the 50s and then look at the 8K, plasma or QLED screens that exist today. Like, they're just leaps in technology, and they keep getting better and better. Another good example would be like the original Mac from 1984 compared to the iMacs and the MacBook Pros they're putting out now. For the time, it was revolutionary. And Atari really did a good job of capturing the attention and peaking at the right time and place. But their problem was being able to sustain that through competition and through an oversaturated video game market. So by my estimation, there are 4 reasons that Atari went out of business. And there's a ton of books on the rise and fall of Atari. None that I've read one probably 5 years ago, which kind of sparked this topic for the show. And I can't really recommend it one way or the other because I haven't read it. It's not top of mind. But there's 4 main reasons that I think Atari had crumbled. And the first reason is they had an oversaturation in the marketplace. So as you look at the video game era, even the video arcade game era, in the 1970s and 80s, you had a ton of new game developers coming into the marketplace trying to compete. Now, one little known video game maker in the early 80s that is now market dominant in 2023 was Nintendo. Nintendo, between 1981 and 1985, developed Donkey Kong. And then in 1985, they released, what I would say is their most well-known and popular game, Super Mario Brothers. So you had people coming into the marketplace with games that ended up being global favorites forever and ever. So much so they, base movies and, literature, pop culture, all surrounding these very popular games. And Atari just couldn't compete. The oversaturation in the marketplace was too hard for them to keep up with. And I would argue that from a systems perspective, they didn't build to change. They built for the games that they had in their pipeline. Which leads me to my second point is they had a lot of poorly made games. A lot of games that they released were just not well put together. They were buggy. People had complaints. And when you're in a situation where you have 10 other competitors that you can turn to, the first time you experience a problem, you're going to go somewhere else. It's like if you're situated around 20 restaurants and you go into one and have a bad experience, chances are you're not going to go back there because you have 19 other options. In the video game market, it was the exact same thing in the late 70s and early 80s. There's a ton of developers and people that are trying to vie for people's dollars. And if you're releasing games that are consistently buggy, you're going to develop a bad reputation. And who's your main audience? Kids. What are kids going to do? They're going to tell their friends, don't play that game. It sucks. It's buggy. You don't want to use it. You want to use Nintendo or you want to use Sega. And those are the types of things that can spread. There's no social media in the early 80s, but there's a network of kids that will absolutely talk to each other and make recommendations. And no one wants to be the kid playing the buggy game while all their friends are playing the games that are super popular. You can throw barrels at Super Mario, or you can play a buggy Atari game. Your choice. So piggybacking off the oversaturation bullet point, I think the third reason is competition. The competition obviously exists in an oversaturated market, but video game makers like Nintendo and Sega were coming into the marketplace with premium games for the time. They were taking the excitement and the energy that Atari generated with their games, and they were capitalizing on it by making games that were significantly better. And that's late 70s, 79 to 81 is when we saw the market share shift away from Atari to these other developers. So not only were they coming into the marketplace to compete, but they were putting out products that were demonstrably better than what Atari was putting forward. And the last issue, which I would say underpins the first 3 points, is poor management. Atari didn't prioritize their leadership, their management team, their execution, they had such a large boom between 72 and 77 that they never prioritized proper leadership, proper systems and strategies, quality control. They just hit the ground running because they hit in such a boom period. They didn't think to slow down, plan for growth, and plan for how the video game market was going to be changing in the 80s and 90s. And because they didn't have an eye on long-term strategy, they fell into a system where they were just trying to put out games as fast as possible to meet demand. And through that, they had quality control issues, a lot of bugs in their games. They didn't develop games that were engaging for where the marketplace was at. And all of that, I would say, is underpinned by their leadership team not doing a good job. And this is bared itself out through the research and history that's went through and been talked about at Atari. It just wasn't the best place to work because of that demand. And with that demand comes people who are overworked, they're frustrated. That's going to affect their quality of work, and that's going to show through into the products, which it did in the early 80s when they decided to sell the company and split up.
Was that an American-based company?
It was. So Atari was based, I believe, in California. Steve Jobs worked there as a contractor in the 70s. That was one of his first forays. So yeah, it was based, I'm pretty sure, near Silicon Valley.
Well, maybe he learned from that, eh?
Yeah. And you know what? Now that you say that, Johnny, I have Google right in front of me, so we can just fact check myself. Where did Atari start? Because that was not in my research. Yeah, Sunnyvale, California, 1972.
Yeah, right on.
So look at me go. Good guesser. So I think to kind of summarize Atari, very focused on short-term rather than long-term. And that massive explosion that they had, they couldn't capitalize on it and leverage it into a long-term strategy that would sustain the company. And other companies in the marketplace came along and ate their lunch. And Nintendo and Sega, I would say, would be chief of most. And Sega was super dominant in the 90s, and they fell off as well. But what's interesting is the long-term success that Nintendo has had. And getting into the business side of this podcast, I would say Nintendo is arguably one of the best companies at pivoting in the marketplace. They've done this for their entire history, from being able to dominate the handheld market with Game Boys in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then to transition that into the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Wii and these consoles that, I mean, I can't remember what year it was, but right around 2006, 2007, like Christmas time, it was impossible to find a Nintendo Wii. It was the hottest console in the market. I would imagine people would trade organs for a Nintendo Wii in 2006. Did you experience that, Johnny, with your girls?
Well, we played Wii, but I guess I never really realized that Wii was even a Nintendo, right? I always just referred to it as a Wii, so I didn't realize that was a Nintendo device. Yep. I'll be darned. But yeah, we were on that same thing, waiting in lines, trying to get one, procure one and that. And, every year, even after it was like way out, we were still buying games for it.
Yeah. I remember when I was younger, probably the years are tough, but like 2002 to 2004, I had the Nintendo Cube, which was the predecessor to the Wii, and that was super fun. It was similar to the Nintendo 64. So as you go back in Nintendo's history, you can see their consoles placated to the market.
Well, and they bombed. I mean, not bombed isn't a bad thing. I mean, they hit a home run with the whole idea of get your butt off the couch playing a game and being immersed in the game, with exercise. So it could be, it was kind of twofold, gaming and some exercise at the same time.
Yeah. I remember playing Wii Golf, and like the next day I'm like, damn, like the back's hurting. I shot 72 holes yesterday on the Wii.
Dude, I still hold the hula hoop competition winner at my house, and that likely to kill me.
I was laid up for 5 days, but I got that record. I love it. But that's why I think Nintendo, if I look at companies that have been successful in pivoting over the years, you have the Nintendo 64, you have the GameCube, the Wii, the Nintendo Switch, which is a wildly popular device. And if you look at market share for video game consoles, and I was a little bit surprised when I looked at this, I expected, I guess going into researching this podcast, I assumed that Sony and Microsoft would have an even share in the marketplace and Nintendo would be, marginally lower. So I was thinking like maybe 40-40-20. But as I was looking into the research, Sony dominates the marketplace at 45%. Nintendo is second at 27.7%, and Microsoft is third at 27.3%. So they're pretty much tied. But I was just surprised that Nintendo has such a large market share. But their games are phenomenal. We have a Switch at home. Zelda is tremendous. My kids play Super Smash Brothers and, Mario Kart and all those super fun party games. But it's just nice to see that company can continue to put out hits and change and adapt with the current market. I think that's a sign of a really good company. So as I was putting the show together, I thought, what are the three best large scale companies that pivot well and have pivoted well through the years? So Nintendo was one. I thought that was appropriate because we were talking about video games today. The second company is Netflix. Now, if you remember back in the day, Netflix was a subscription service where you would order DVDs and they'd ship them to your house. Now, Netflix saw very early on that DVDs were going to be replaced by digital media, and I would argue that they were the earliest adopter of this concept because they rolled out a digital subscription plan alongside of their DVD plan for a long time. And I don't know, I should look into this, but I think Netflix will still ship DVDs. Maybe they won't. But again, that's something I can look up while we're sitting here.
Actually, I just saw a thing on that Netflix was allowing people that have a DVD that's still outstanding just to keep it now.
Oh, really?
Just saw that in the last maybe 2 weeks. I heard that somewhere.
Oh, I see this. Okay, this is very timely. So they're shipping out their final discs on September 29th, 2023. After 25 years, Netflix is ending its DVD by mail business. Wow, how timely. So yes, right up until the recording of this show, you could still get DVDs from Netflix. But they ran those services parallel for a long time and promoted them as well. So obviously they still do it now, but they promoted them parallel for a long time because they had a foot in both worlds. People that didn't want to subscribe to digital because of internet or whatever it may be, and then people that were emerging into the internet and streaming culture. So Netflix has done a tremendous job of being able to leverage both sides of the market, have a foot in both worlds, and then ease off one and leverage the other. And I think that's a sign of a fantastic company. And they've done a lot since then. They've added a lot of new features, and they've even produced their own. They even have their own production company now. They have Netflix original films, documentaries, TV shows. It's quite impressive what a company like Netflix has turned into over the last 20 years. So that's Netflix. So the third company that I want to talk about is PayPal. Now, PayPal originally started as a payment processing add-on for eBay. So you'd go to eBay, you'd purchase something, and you would check out with PayPal. But over the years, PayPal has separated from eBay, and they've turned into a standard financing company. And it's been really impressive to see how much they've evolved over the last 10 years, especially. And in my opinion, I always thought PayPal was going to be something that was always going to be tied to eBay. I didn't really see it as a standalone company. And to their credit, they've been able to stand on their own and distance themselves from eBay. Not that there's anything wrong with eBay, but just be something that's not so dependent on another company. So Nintendo, Netflix, PayPal, I think all excellent companies when it comes to being able to pivot and adapt to the marketplace. Now, pivoting is one of the hardest things to do in business. And what happens is people get so entrenched with their own products and offerings that they take away their ability to pivot because they're so deeply ingrained in what they're doing right now. They're not looking into the future. So being able to pivot as a small business is one of the best strengths that you can have. Companies that were in a position to pivot in March of 2020 had far better results coming out of the pandemic than those that weren't able to. And as a leader, as a business owner, your job is to be able to assess market conditions and be able to have contingency plans for if something happens. And if you've done very little thinking in terms of planning for problems or economic shifts, then you're really doing your business and your people a disservice, because that should be top of mind. Whether you've been in business a year or 10 years, those contingency plans are important to the longevity of your organization. One quote that came up, oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just sent you a thing a week or so ago for like Kodak is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not so sure if you watched that video that I sent you talking about, how Kodak just never pivoted, right? Stayed with the film industry, and now they're a bit player.
Yeah.
Right, on anything.
Yeah, small, super small market share. They're like a novelty company.
Yeah, just little snap cameras, and that's about it that they have now.
Yeah, and that's another example of missing the boat. We should do a whole show on Kodak, because I saw that clip that you had sent, and then there's also another YouTuber that did a deep dive into Kodak recently as well that I thought was really good. But as I was going through looking at different leaders' perspectives on change, I found this one. This is from Douglas MacArthur, wildly famous general in World War II and also in Korea as well. He says, "A true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent." And something that I've always found really difficult about leadership is the isolationism that inherently comes along with being a leader. It can feel very lonely, and it can be very difficult to make decisions, because the way that you think as a leader, by definition, is different than the majority of the people. The majority of the people in our societies are not leaders. So when you enact policies, or when you're thinking about long-term plans for a business, naturally it's going to go against the grain of most people, because it's not how they're thinking. And this is why I've always, as a leader, tried to get buy-in from people and explain the why behind the decisions, because if you just make decisions and not tell people why you're doing it, you're going to have less buy-in, and they're going to champion the idea from a very weak position. Whereas if you explain why you're doing it, you gain the buy-in. They're going to champion that new position or that new policy or whatever it is that you're pushing. They're going to champion it really well because they believe in it. And it's difficult to do that sometimes because you're in go mode. And I've had this before where I've been head down, making a lot of decisions, trying to carve out a lot of things. And then this happened recently. Monthly, we meet as a creative team, and we talk about, the next strategy for the next month, what we're going to be working on, industry trends, things like that. And they meet with me specifically because they meet weekly independently with the creative team. But we were sitting there talking about all of these things that have been changing in the last month. And someone had said, we just wanted to sit down to better understand, your thinking on this, so that way we can all circle around this idea as well. And that was really nice to hear, because someone would only say that if that's been modeled for them before. And that's what I've always appreciated about our culture here, is that when people buy into something, they're all in. And when there's a lot of ideas coming down the pipeline, now that we've been doing this for, I think, 5 years, this November is when I first opened the company. When you've been doing something on that type of repetition for so long, people start to model after, that framework, so long as it's, a good one. So to hear people say, hey, we want to know more about this so we can, buy into this idea as well, that's a really good positive sign of a meaningful culture. And going back to this quote here, leadership is not something like, you don't wake up one day and you're like, I'm going to become a leader and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Like, it's not something that is, you can just wake up one day and decide to do it. It's something that takes time to develop, and it takes time to, I don't want to say earn that title, but it just takes time to be in that position to where people will then rally behind you, because you have all of the makings of someone that is worth following. And it's not, I see a lot where people just kind of throw themselves into this position or title, and it's not that simple. It's not that easy to have people be able to buy into what you're doing, because it has to be earned. And I like this last line here. A leader is a leader because he becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. And you can't understand someone's equality of their actions or the integrity of their intent without watching them for a certain amount of time. And that's where that time in the position comes into play. So you might start out as a manager or a VP or someone that is in charge of a team. And over time, as you start to earn credibility with that team, you transform into a leader for them. So the verse for today is Proverbs 27:17. It's iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And I thought this was appropriate just largely because it's a community aspect of leadership. You only become a better leader by being around other leaders that can challenge you. And if you're just making decisions in a vacuum, you're never going to feel fully challenged. And lastly, what I wanted to go through was a book recommendation. So I want to start doing this in every podcast. And the book that I have today is Leadership, Strategy, and Tactics by Jocko Willink. This is his third book. What I really enjoy about this book is it's more of like a reference book. You don't need to read it straight through. As a matter of fact, as you go through the back end of the book, there's just sections. So if you're struggling with how to get someone to buy into your idea or how not to take things personally or imposter syndrome, you can just go to that section and read on it. You certainly don't need to read it straight through. So it's called a field manual, and it very much is for your business. So if you're trying to get more done in your organization and you're struggling with really key leadership concepts, I'd recommend picking up this book and going through some of these things. Especially, I love the section on imposter syndrome. It's only 2 or 3 pages, but it gets right to the meat of the problem. And there's a ton of other wisdom in the book as well that Jocko gives from his years in the SEAL teams, as well as helping organizations get back on their feet. So I highly recommend that. So apart from that, that will close this week's episode of Theory of Why. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll catch you next time. Take care.